ALEC, we're all about bringing together state leaders to exchange ideas, best practices, as you mentioned, all centered around those core principles. Because when states compete for economic growth and opportunity, when states try to create better economies, the American people win when we create opportunity. And
joining us now from the land of make-believe, the land of nod, is Lee Schalk, Vice President for Policy at the American Legislative Exchange Council. Lee, good morning to you. Welcome back to News Talk STL. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Tim, and good morning from Washington, D.C. It certainly is spooky season here in the nation's capital.
Yes, it is. Lee, do you care to read any tea leaves? We're trying to figure out who this Mike Johnson character is. He seems like a good duck, but we're largely unfamiliar with him. I was reading his bio earlier, and we were talking a little bit about him, and I like the fact that he's a former chair of the Republican Study Committee, kind of the conscience of the House Republican majority. Do you know anything more about him? Do you any nuggets you'd like to drop on our audience here in the Heartland?
Well, I tell you what, it's hard to keep track of the nominees here and figure out. It seems like day by day we've got a different name tossed around, but it really is sad. You know, we don't have a Speaker of the House. It feels like we've been going for weeks now. Of course, in the White House, we're not sure if anyone's home. And so, again, Washington, D.C. is really, I think, letting down the American people, which puts all the more focus on the states and what we can get done in state capitals.
Good morning, Lee. Gabe Phifer here. Just wanted to segue a little bit to another topic. When I got to my job, I have a day job as an engineer, but when I got to my job, I noticed there was a significant difference in the numbers of people who were basically of retirement age versus me coming in as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed college graduate. So, and I looked at it and I said, this is a demographic bomb. When these guys decide to leave, they're going to take a lot of their expertise with us and we're going to be in trouble. And I'm looking at something similar in reference to the pension liabilities that a lot of states are carrying, where I think that bomb is pretty much going off in slow motion as a lot of people are taking their retirement and their pension, and the pension liabilities for these states are going up. What's going on with these things? Is this a situation we can get out of?
Well, you're right. It is a ticking time bomb. We looked at the unfunded public pension liabilities across the 50 states. It totals up to over $7 trillion nationwide. That's $21,000 per person. That's every man, woman, and child in the United States. And there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. One, of course, we want to keep the pension promises that we've made to public sector workers, right? These are retirements that they're relying on. But also, we've got to protect taxpayers. These unfunded pension plans, these are bills that are going to come due, really what will amount to future tax increases. And so we've got to figure out a way to transition over to 401k style plans. Some states have been successful with this, North Dakota being the most recent example. But as you look across the country, there are some good examples of pension reform that have taken place, but also some states that are really drowning in these unfunded pension liabilities.
Mm-hmm. Speaking to Lee Schalk, Vice President of Policy at the American Legislative Exchange Council, you can find out all the things that ALEC is working on at alec.org. Well, Lee, as we discussed, we'll see whether or not the U.S. House gets a speaker. But thankfully, as far as I'm aware, all of the 50 states do have functional legislatures. They have speakers. They have floor leaders. They have presidents of the Senate. Lee, there's a lot of activity going on in the states. And, you know, as much as the national press likes to ignore it, there is a movement going on in the country, isn't there, Lee, where people are starting to vote with their feet, and they're moving to states that, you know, ALEC, I think, takes a lot of pride in, the states that exemplify the ALEC motto of limited government, of federalism, and of free markets. Lee, am I imagining that, or are all the stories and the podcasts and the discussions and the interviews that I'm seeing and hearing, which are reflecting this massive income migration, actually going on in the country or not?
Tim, you're exactly right. And that's the beauty of our 50 laboratories of democracy. At ALEC, we're all about bringing together state leaders to exchange ideas, best practices, as you mentioned, all centered around those core principles. Because when states compete for economic growth and opportunity, when states try to create better economies, the American people win when we create opportunity. And so you're right. There's been a huge migration of taxpayers, of American citizens leaving states like California, New York, New Jersey to places with more opportunity, with lower taxes, places like Florida, North Carolina, Texas, Arizona. I could go on. But what we've seen, and we've talked about this so many times in ALEC's Rich States, Poor States publication. You can check that out at richstatespoorstates.org. But it really is important when we talk about our tax and economic policies, fostering growth. And that really goes a long way to attract businesses and individuals and help everybody thrive.
Speaking of taxpayer rights, we've got the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. I think that's up for the debate. Where is it right now?
It's under attack.
It's under attack. Well, there is that aspect of it. Tell us a little bit. First of all, for those of us who haven't heard of this, tell us what the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is and who's going after it.
Absolutely. So TABOR, or the Taxpayers Bill of Rights, this is a constitutional amendment in Colorado. And really, since 1992, this is the only thing stopping Colorado from becoming California. Now, we've seen so many changes in Colorado over the years, but thankfully, tax burdens have remained relatively low, especially when you look at the income tax rates. But TABOR, the way it works is it limits tax burdens and government spending to inflation plus population growth. So if the government is collecting revenue above the TABOR limit, all of that gets sent back to taxpayers in the form of a TABOR refund. Now, there's a ballot measure, Prop HH, which is threatening to undo TABOR this November, really a bait and switch, alleged property tax cuts, but TABOR refunds will disappear. And so this is really, again, from the progressives in Colorado and the governor, it's under attack, but something to keep an eye on because it's such a great example of a great constitutional amendment that other states should consider.
Yeah, Lee, Colorado has TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Here in Missouri, we've got something called the Hancock Amendment, which tends to limit government from growing beyond its means. But Lee, a lot of states, even the red Republican ones, don't have a lot of restraints on the appropriators, whether the appropriators are Republicans or Democrats. Lee, why do you think that is? Is it because the appropriators, no matter what political party they are, they don't want to be told how much money they can spend?
Well, you're right, Tim. In Missouri, they have the Hancock Amendment since 1980. That's tied to personal income tax growth. But yeah, it's the elephant in the room, right? No pun intended there, but it doesn't matter, Republicans or Democrats. We have a huge spending problem at all levels of government, not just the federal government. State and local spending growth has ballooned over the last 40 years by 90%. And so we often say, taxes and spending, they're the same, two sides of the same fiscal coin. If you can't get your spending in check, you're going to suffer through higher tax rates as well. And so it's so critical to have constitutional amendments like TABOR in place to put those extra checks and balances on spending growth.
Wise words indeed. You can't just cut taxes. You gotta definitely watch your spending and spend appropriately. Lee, before we let you go, another publication. We've talked about the unaccountable and unaffordable pension reform. You can find that at ALEC.org. We've talked about Rich States, Poor States. You can find that at ALEC.org or at richstatespoorstates.org. State education freedom. Lee, we spoke with Andrew Handel from your education task force last week. One thing I noticed additionally for people to check out on the ALEC website is the fact that ALEC celebrated 50 years, its 50th anniversary. I was very happy to be a part of that a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C., born out of the spirit of the Reagan Revolution. And Lee, I know in that video of 50 years of trusted policy solutions, you highlight not just the states that always jump to mind under these topics of Florida and Texas and so on and so forth, but Lee, there's also a revolution happening here in the heartland in the Midwest, right? With the lady leaders that we've got to our north and south, Governor Kim Reynolds in Iowa, Sarah Huckabee Sanders down in Arkansas. We here in Missouri, Lee, we better get our act together, right, and start moving forward on some of these issues of tax cuts and tax reform, educational choice, and making sure that our state government is focused on the right things, because we're seeing kind of that revolution 50 years later here in the heartland, aren't we?
You certainly are. And Tim, if there's one thing we've learned over the past 50 years at ALEC, it's that states can fall behind by standing still. And the Midwest there is getting increasingly competitive. Of course, Iowa has they came out swinging last year with both tax cuts major tax reform, flattening and lowering income tax rates, but also with universal education freedom policies, education savings accounts that every student in the state is eligible for. We've seen the same thing in Arkansas, to your point. Governor Sanders and just a great group of lawmakers there in Arkansas, also with the universal school choice, seeking ways to lower tax burdens. And so you're right, as you compete for businesses, as you try to create more competitive environments, that will be critical to step on the gas and not sit back and rest on your laurels.
Could not agree more. Lee Schalk, who is the Vice President of Policy at the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC.org, has been our guest here this morning. Lee, this was an excellent conversation. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we'll look forward to speaking with you in the near future as our legislature gets back to work in the 2024 session.
Thank you, Tim. Great speaking with you as always.